Welcome to the Lida Citroën Podcast, your space to grow your influence and elevate your personal brand. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical strategies to help you stand out, lift up others, and leave your mark on your team, your community, or the world. If you're ready to make your voice heard, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hello, my friends. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you are healthy, happy, and safe. I'm Lida Citroën, and I am so excited to talk with you today about why this podcast and give you some nuggets of wisdom. So there are three things that I've been seeing more today than probably over the past 30 years. And the first is that there is this overwhelming desire, call, sort of need that people are coming to me with, where they want to be heard. They want to be seen. They're tired of being invisible, and they know they want more, but they don't know how to get it. Maybe they've, passed up promotions because they didn't feel confident enough. Maybe they're wrestling with imposter syndrome, and I really don't belong here because they're going to figure out that I'm not good. Or they just don't know how to get to the next thing. So that's the first thing I'm seeing a lot. And I say more today, more post-COVID than I think before the pandemic. The second thing is that the world has gotten really loud. Social media is bombarding us with messages and advertisements and influencer marketing. We're getting it through our television. We're getting it through every vehicle that we have to receive communication. Even some of my conversations lately with people have turned into what feel like infomercials. And it's too much. It's too much noise. So at the same time we want to be heard and seen, there's this almost pull to finding something quiet, finding something that isn't so loud. And at the same time, as the world has gotten louder, our ability to stand out has gotten harder. So many people who are trying to find their next, are trying to figure out how to be more visible in the world, are going back to those old rules. The old rules of, look a certain way, sound a certain way, and have gravitas, right? Which everybody says is important, yet no one knows how to define or teach. So those are the first two. And then the third one is we're tired of playing small. So I know that might sound like the first point that I made, but this is really different. We're tired of playing small. We've got an idea. We've got a thought. We've got a challenge that we want to bring up to our team, to our company, to our community, socially, and we don't know how to do that. We're so afraid of being judged. We're so afraid of being rejected. And this whole cancel culture thing has really turned people scared. So here we are wanting more, wanting to have a bigger voice, wanting to be seen. The world has gotten louder, and the old ways of being seen and building leadership aren't working. And we have an idea that we're tired of playing small around. And that's really why I'm here. When I wrote the book, The New Rules of Influence, I wanted to tackle those same three things. The New Rules of Influence, which published, as you probably know, in August of 2024, was my letter to all of you about how to step out of the shadows, how to come forward in a meaningful, thoughtful, and strategic way to make yourself heard, make yourself seen, to stop playing small, to get rid of these tapes and narratives and beliefs that many of us were brought up with that just aren't working anymore. And it's working. I mean, I'm hearing from people all over the world. It's surprising how many global readers we have of the book that are saying, this isn't based on, data and research and science and all this heavy theoretical stuff. The book is really practical, and it's down to earth, and it's conversational. And a few people have even said that it feels like they're having a conversation with a friend. And that's really the point. And that's the point of this podcast. I'm going to be sharing with you conversations with people who are outstanding and lovely and beautiful and thoughtful and complicated. And they're maybe not headline names that you would, read about in the news, but there are people who have something important to say. And my hope is, as you listen to these conversations, that you take away one nugget. You take away one idea or one thought that makes you think a little differently about how you're coming forward, how you're sharing your voice. That would be the greatest joy I could imagine, is if you get something out of each podcast. They're going to be 30, 45 minutes. We're going to have 15 minutes of action items. So they're going to be meaty, but also very conversational, kind of fun, right? We might even have fun in the conversation, and that's always nice to hear. But that's really why we're doing this. So the Lida Citroën Podcast is an ongoing conversation to help you grow. I have my wonderful colleague, Sabrina, who is running all the mechanics in the background. And if you could see her, you'd see that she's smiling because she doesn't like the spotlight, but she's running all the mechanics in the background. And if you have a thought or an idea for the podcast, be sure to write to either her or I and let us know what that idea is. So let's dive into some content today. You know that I'm pretty well known for this concept of personal branding, right? And what's funny is when I started in the personal branding space, moving out of corporate or product branding, in 2008, nobody knew what personal branding was. It was so hard to explain to people because it either reminded them of something a rancher does to his cows, right? Branding, or you thought of it like Nike or Apple, right? That's branding. So what does that mean for people? And what I love about personal branding is, first of all, it's never about being perfect. We can't be perfect. We're human beings. But it is very much about being consistent and intentional. And when we think about our personal brand, we think about how we're going to show up in the world. How do I want people to perceive me and receive me? And so often I run into people who have either built a great reputation in brand and have no idea what they did. So they're afraid to make a mistake now at this point, or they're known differently than how they want to be known. Maybe they're thought of as the office mom, which is a story I share in some of my earlier books of a woman who came to me and that was her challenge. She said, people call me the office mom. And she was in her mid-20s, so it wasn't like a motherly thing. But she said, I'm being passed up for promotions. I'm not even being considered. And when I asked somebody in a different department why they thought I was being passed up, they said, well, you're the office mom. No one wants to lose the office mom. And she said, that's not working for me. So we really looked at the behavior that had gotten her to that reputation. And she's a loving, generous, graceful person. And she was the person that if there was a birthday party, she would go get the napkins and the cake and have the card signed by everybody and set up the conference room so it looked really cute. She was always the person you could go to and talk about anything. And she would spend a lot of time actually in the break room talking to people and just navigating. And the way she thought of that was, I'm being a mentor. But the way it got translated is, well, she's the mom figure. And in moving her away from that reputation, the thing she didn't want is to lose that loving, generous, caring side. And she didn't have to. She just had to become better at delegating. So instead of being the one to pick out the card and clean up after the birthday lunch, she would ask someone else to do that part. She might be the person who you could talk to, but she started drawing boundaries around conversations that weren't professional, let's say. So it was these small movements and actions that she took with an understanding of how she wanted to be known that helped her move away from that. She's still known as loving and generous, and she was able to secure 2 promotions in the course of 5 years. So it worked. And perception is a tricky thing, right? I work in the field of perception. It's often unfair right? Because we judge people, we form opinions, we have beliefs, sometimes based on what I see or what I hear. And what's tricky about perception is it's often wrong. My perception of you can be based on someone else I knew that you remind me of, or it could be based on how you acted the first day on the job. And I continue to perceive you that way, even though you've grown professionally and personally. Perception is often wrong. So, how do we manage perception to understand when it's changed to the negative? That's what personal branding helps us with. Personal branding is where you take control over how you want people to perceive you. Now, we can't change other people. We can't control other people. If you've been married, you know you might try, but we're not allowed to change or control other people, but we can influence them. And that's why influence is so important, because influence is where personal branding really hits the road, right? Your personal brand is how you manage and sort of drive your reputation. Influence is this beautiful, rich, just amazing result that comes when you are building your personal brand to a positive outcome, right? People build personal brands for financial gain or for status. That happens all the time. But when you build your personal brand to make people or communities or the world better, that influence is remarkable. It just fills my heart when I hear stories of people who have used it that way. And oftentimes these are not people who have a job title that starts with C, right? CEO, CTO, CIO. No, they might be junior software architect or, administrative assistant, but they're having influence. They are serving others. They are inclusive in their mindset. They're real and genuine when you talk to them. They're visible. They care about being seen so that they can serve. They're not just being seen for personal rewards. They're being seen so that they can bring a message forward. They can bring an idea forward. They can help people get forward. And making that kind of impact is rewarding on so many levels. I mean, I think about the military veterans that I have been so blessed to work alongside for 15 plus years. I have no background in the military. I didn't know anything about the different branches of the military, what it meant to serve our country. I just knew that there were people in this space called the United States who had raised their hand to protect and defend my freedom, not even knowing me, right? They put themselves and their family in a place of sacrifice and resilience and adversity so that I, Lida, could walk around this world safe and free and protected. And I was blown away by that. I just couldn't even believe that people would do that. And so when I started working with the military, sure, you have outliers in every class or group of people, but for the most part, there's this commitment to service, and it is bigger than most of us, and that's okay. Less than 2% of the population in the United States has served in the military. That's a small number for a reason, right? It is a big ask. But the rest of us can learn from that and look at ways we can serve others, right? Instead of always putting our needs first, instead of always thinking about what's best for us, we can look at how we can serve someone else. You know what's really cool? In the service of others, we benefit. We benefit. You don't think my heart gets happy every time I help a transitioning military service member learn about the civilian culture or help them with their LinkedIn profile or talk to them about the fact that leaning into their passion and finding their voice at this time in their life is possible? You don't think my heart gets happy when that person says, "Wow, I think I can do that." Oh my gosh, the benefits I get, almost I feel selfish. Like I get so many benefits from that and I'm giving to someone else. That's the power of service. Your voice matters. My new book, The New Rules of Influence, shows you how to build long-lasting impact with authenticity, no tie or title required. Get your copy of the book today and start owning your voice. When was the last time your keynote speaker drove more action than just excitement? Today, it's not just enough to energize the audience. We need to show them how to use the skills we're teaching. If you're looking for a speaker who will drive your business goals, let's talk. Check out Lida360.com for more information. So when we talk about influence, it is very much about that. So personal branding, influence, and reputation, right? Going back to that point I made about perception, how people know you, what they think about you is where they assign you value. So if I know you to be someone who is collaborative and has a positive attitude and will look at complex problems and try to solve them in an efficient way, then I'm going to bring things to you, right? I'm going to look for opportunities to bring you forward so that not only are you helping me, but I'm tapping into your superpowers. But if I perceive you based on your reputation as someone who's difficult, right? Maybe always the yeah, but person. Do you know someone like that? I know a lot of yeah, but people. I don't know why I attract them. It's yeah, but or but except, right? Well, that's a good idea, but except here's why it won't work. Or I would love to join you, but there always is a problem, right? Those aren't the people I'm going to want to grow in my company because my perception of them is negative. I mean, it's not positive. Let's put it that way. It's not positive. So I'm going to look for people who I perceive based on their reputation over time as the people that I want to grow, the people I want to invest in. Is that right? Is it wrong? I don't know, but it's reality. It's real. People form perception based on your reputation. So how do you manage that? Right? That's what reputation management's all about. How are you showing up online? How are you showing up in your personal interactions? How are you showing up in your communication, in your emails even? Your text messaging, your Slack, your IM, DM, all of that. All of those things send a message about who you are. And that forms your reputation in my mind. And understanding how to work through that is going to be a big part of this podcast. And the last thing is this idea of leadership. And leadership gets a little overused today. Let me explain how I look at leadership. Leadership is a choice, right? And I fully respect when somebody says to me, I don't want to be a leader. I don't choose that because the world needs leaders and we need non-leaders, right? If we're all leaders, then who's following? Right? We're all leading a bunch of leaders. That's not very fun. So we need non-leaders too. And I think it's perfectly fine for someone to say, I'm not interested in and having a mindset and being the kind of person that a leader has to be. I just want to do my work, clock out at 5:00, be responsible for the tasks in front of me, check all the boxes, either as a manager or an individual contributor. I don't want the responsibility of being a leader. That is okay. You can still have influence. You can still build your voice. You should still build a personal brand and manage your reputation. But there are people who want to lead, who are willing to be out front, who are willing to put themselves in that highly vulnerable place where they will get judged, they will be seen, their ideas will be picked apart and looked at. And they're willing to do that because they want to serve and they are so passionate about the idea or the mission that they want to lead. And this podcast will also be for them because we're going to hear from people who have led in difficult spots, places where you wouldn't think we needed leadership. right? Leadership isn't a job title. It's something that we assume when the opportunity presents, right? Somebody needs to lead this mission or this project. So leadership isn't for everyone, but I think even if you don't want to be a leader, that's not your aspiration, you're going to get something out of those conversations because there's going to be that one nugget, that one thought, that one action item that you think, I could do that. And then maybe things would look a little different in my day to day. Or maybe my relationship with my boss will get a little better. Or maybe that colleague that doesn't seem to understand why I should be part of that team or project will start to see my value. And that's great. You're going to get something out of those conversations. So this podcast is going to be for you. It is completely for you. It's not for me. I mean, I love to hear myself talk, but I can just record these all day long and just listen to myself. That's fine. But it's for you because I've spent many, 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 many years. I'm not going to add them up for you, but I've spent many years listening to you, hearing your stories. And some of them make me so happy, and some of them really make me sad. I remember working with a client overseas because I work in 38 countries. I have worked in 38 countries. Some are very hard to find on a map, but I worked with this one client overseas, and it happened to be a woman. This woman was so educated. I mean, she had, I think, not only a bachelor, I believe she had 2 masters and a PhD and a very technical field. I mean, talk about being niched. She was credentialed in one ear and out the other. She was so regarded academically, and she knew her stuff. It wasn't just book smart. She was very, very credentialed, very intelligent. And I found her to be very personable. And every time she would go into a meeting with her peers and senior leadership of her company, it was a global company, she shrank. And I would ask her, like, what does that look like when you shrank or when you shrink? And she said, someone will ask for suggestions. One of my boss's bosses will ask for suggestions or recommendations or ideas. And she said, I've got it in my mind. And I'm chewing on it, trying to think of the best way to say it so I don't get laughed at. I don't make a mistake. And she said, by the time I get to a place that I think I could share it, someone has already shared it and 3 people have built on it. So I have nothing to say. She was playing small. She had every right on paper to be in that room and to contribute. But as soon as she got there, she froze and she didn't know how to assert her voice. Shifting things for her, it took a lot of things, but the biggest thing was preparation. She was a researcher. She knew how to gather data. She knew how to get prepared. Yet for some reason, it never occurred to her that when she was going into a meeting, she should think ahead of time about what she might want to share. But being prepared, having all of those thoughts ahead of time in her mind, she would go into a meeting then and have at least 2 or 3. So when the first question would come up from one of the senior leadership, what recommendations, ideas, or thoughts do any of you have about this particular problem or issue? She had an option ready to go. She didn't have to spend the time live in that meeting thinking about how she was going to share that. She'd already done all that work. So she was ready to go. Now we had to work on the fact that sometimes she came out of the gate a little fast and strong, and it scared some people. They didn't quite understand why she was suddenly speaking up so assertively. So we worked on the nuance of that. But it was being prepared. She had always said, I don't mind speaking in front of people as long as I'm prepared. But it never occurred to her to prepare before going into those meetings. So doing so really helped her find her voice. So this podcast is for people like that, right? Maybe you're a professional, an executive, maybe you're at the top of your game and you're still keeping yourself small. You're still not sharing what you really want to share because you're afraid of how that might come across. I got you. I've been there myself. I've had many clients be there. Um, So we're going to get through that together because I've got some great conversations lined up that are going to speak to that point exactly. Maybe you've got an idea or a mission or an initiative, right? In the book, The New Rules of Influence, I share stories of people who, had a great job. Their day job was awesome, paid a lot of money. They had all the assets you would deem successful, but they wanted to do something else. And they weren't sure if that meant quitting their day job and just completely pivoting, or could they stand it up alongside and therefore, kind of do both at the same time? And what would that look like? Would one jeopardize the other? So if that's what's going on for you and you're thinking, I really see a way that I could serve my community, or maybe my community has been underrepresented and I see a way that I can use my position and influence to bring them forward. Boy, we have some great conversations lined up to meet that, because that's something I'm deeply passionate about. So we got you there. Um, if you just want, going back to what I opened with, if you just want to be heard and you want to be seen, I'm going to share tactics. I'm going to share ideas and strategies that you can take away from each conversation and think, well, maybe I could try that. Let me try that over the next week and see if it makes a difference. One that I have shared on other people's podcast that seems to be getting good attention is a story that I share when I was in one of my last corporate jobs before I left that world and started my own company. And I worked in an organization where we had a board of directors. And every month, the board of directors would come together and senior staff would be in the room to share updates and talk through developments and initiatives and progress. And the board of directors would hear that and have a comfort level of where we were and be able to give us advice. So I was senior staff on the business development side. And every month we would go into this room, and there was an oval table in the center of the room, and that's where the board sat. And staff would sit in these chairs alongside the walls. And every month, the board would come in, sit at the oval table, and staff would sit alongside. And one time I remember noticing that there were empty seats at the oval table. And I had trouble hearing because the board's back was to us in some cases. Some people were facing us, but others, they had their back to us. And it was always difficult to hear what they were saying. So about 6 months in to this job, I thought, what the heck? And I just sat at the table, the oval table. And sure enough, the board came in and some of them looked at me and kind of gave me an inquisitive look. My boss wasn't quite sure what to do with that, but nobody said anything. And I thought, God, this is awesome. I can hear everybody now. And when I speak, everybody can hear me because I'm at the center of the table, or the center of the room. The next month, I did it again. I sat at the oval table. And this time, when I had something to say, I raised my hand and I offered my view. And it was weird. I felt more like I was part of the meeting by doing this. Nobody said anything. Third month, I do the same thing. And one of my colleagues joined me at the table because there were plenty of room, plenty of seats. And they sat at the table. And then the month after that, we're both sitting at the table and they said something. And that's what started the pattern of, there was no reason, there was no explanation for why we sat along the wall, why we were separated out when there were plenty of seats. And assuming those seats at the table with the board of directors shifted our mindset, it built our visibility, and it built our respect and credibility with the board. It didn't look like a caste system, right? We weren't them and they were us. We were one. We were one organization moving towards a mission. That's a small thing to do, but I'll tell you, it was scary the first time I did it, and it was probably scary the second time. By the third time, I got a little more comfortable with it. And that's really how this process works. You're not going to shift everything overnight. You're not going to go from being unknown, back office, quiet, introverted, and reserved to all of a sudden being an online influencer and a brand ambassador and screaming from rooftops. That's not what this is about. But it is about being really clear on who you are, what you can offer, who needs what you have to offer, and the best ways to get in front of those people with your offer to make the results happen that you want. That's what this is about. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you over the course of this podcast. So, just so you know, the schedule that we're going forward with is every other week. We're going to start off with that may change at some point and you'll get notified. Hopefully, we're connected or you're following me on LinkedIn. Watch the podcast page. We'll put updates up there. But the goal is to start off every other week. And they're about 30 to 45-minute conversations. They're real stories, practical examples, strategies, and tactics from people who have walked the talk. My ask of you is that you subscribe to the podcast. That really helps. Whatever platform you like to listen to podcasts on, just subscribe to the podcast and follow us to be able to get those updates, to hear what the next message is going to be, to make sure you don't miss a conversation that really speaks to what you care about. And share this with a friend or colleague. Whether you listen to these conversations while you're walking, on a train, or doing the dishes, right, which is my typical podcast time, then share it with a friend. Tell someone else about something that you learned so that they can benefit. It is super awesome, amazing if you can leave a review. Supposedly, that does a lot to help these podcasts grow. And get a copy of The New Rules of Influence. The book is really going to map beautifully to what we're going to be talking about over the course of these messages and conversations. So with that, I thank you for listening to episode 1 of the Lida Citroën Podcast. I hope you got something out of today's conversation, and I'll look forward to seeing you on our next conversation where we will dive even deeper into the topics we shared today. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, happy, and healthy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lida Citroën Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show and leave a review. It helps more people discover these inspiring conversations. For more tools, insights, and resources, visit Lida360.com or connect with Lida on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, your influence has the power to make a real difference.